Hello, and welcome to another of my video podcasts on positive aging. Last week, something happened to me which was dispiriting, unfair, unjust, very disappointing. Uh, when a friend of mine heard about this, she very kindly emailed me and said, "Would you like a cup of coffee and a rant?" And that was extremely nice of her. Uh, but I came to the conclusion that I didn't want to rant for a number of reasons. Let me explain why. First of all, do you remember all those programs? I think they were called Grumpy Old Women, or Grumpy Old Woman, I can't remember. About 15 years ago, were they? And I think there was a stage show as well. I think myself, that view of the old bird who feels she's got permission to sound off on anything that she disagrees with, feels a bit, I don't know, last century, if not last century, certainly pre-COVID. We're living in a period of such uncertainty. Possibly just letting your anger free rein isn't a very good idea at the moment, it seems to me. It's certainly, when you're roused to fury, you're stressed, aren't you? You're stressing yourself out. And I'm not at all sure that that's a good thing. I mean, most doctors would agree. I was reading something from Harvard Medical School the other day. Most doctors would agree that that level of constant stress, very aging, that's not what we're trying to achieve here, is it? And bad for your mind and bad for your body, all those stress chemicals pounding around your frame. So maybe not such a good idea. The second reason for not going into a rant, in my case, was that I've come to the conclusion that going into a rant doesn't necessarily diffuse your anger, or make the situation any better. My reason for saying that is that I know people who have got a whole repertoire of rants. They trot them out, you're having a conversation with them, and they'll suddenly go, "That reminds me of when my boyfriend dumped me 34 years ago, and I still feel as cross about that today as I did then." And they're in this very hot fury, and you'd think after 34 years, might it not be time to let it go? But it's almost like they bring it out, dust it over, and off they go. So does ranting defuse and improve a situation? I'm not very convinced about that. So I decided that I wouldn't rant. I decided that it was something that just happened beyond my control. And let's face it, there's a lot of things happening beyond our control at the moment. And that it's far better, perhaps, to just go, there's a lot I can't control at the moment, but there's still plenty that I can, and I'll go with that. Easier said than done, but that's what I'm trying to do. What has fed into this thinking a little bit, quite apart from the fact that I think when older people get angry, they just look older, is that I remember when the 7/7 bombings happened in London. I believe it was 2005. And I knew a doctor who worked that morning with the survivors, who were many of them were young city workers, high flyers in finance and whatever, and they were caught up in the explosions. And obviously some were injured, but some were just profoundly shocked. I'm sure that was terrible. Anyway, this doctor friend of mine told me about a senior colleague who I think was masterminding what to do with all these people, and they were all taken to hospital. His theory was that when people are in a very aroused state, a very passionate, very furious or whatever state, wired, I think was the term that he used, that if you then at that point talk out what has happened, actually it could reinforce, cement in almost those feelings and the trauma and everything, rather than help you to get rid of it. That was his theory, and I think it was possibly fairly controversial at the time, but as I understand it, and I hope I'm not getting this wrong, most of the people that he was in charge of were offered the chance to have some tranquilizers so they could really rest. Many of them did not want that because they wanted to keep their control, but some did. But they were left then for 48 hours without going into proper therapy or counselling, which would normally be offered. And indeed it was offered later. And the reasoning behind that was that he believed that post-traumatic stress disorder was more likely to happen if people had this kind of reinforcement while they were in a very aroused state early on, and that it was better to let the mind rest for a while and then to have the counselling. I don't really know whether that caught on and whether that was a good thing, but it's always struck me as being very sensible. And so I think that partly fed into my decision not to rant the other day. Just before I go, I want to tell you that quite a few of you at different times have said, would I ever consider doing one-to-one sessions with people? And I had felt actually that my coaching and therapy days were possibly over after my husband died. But I have decided to start a coaching practice again on a small scale, focusing on positive aging, and tailoring those sessions on Skype or Zoom, certainly at the moment, to individuals who want that help. So if this applies to you by any chance, there will be something on my website, christinewebber.com, or you can email me, christinewebber@christinewebber.com. So there we have it, to rant or not to rant. On balance, probably best not. That's what I think anyway.